Two major jury trials going on as we speak. The psychology of the juror tonight. Dr. Thomas Guilmette from Providence College is my guest, a psychology professor who also applies psychology to the law. And so, my gosh, there's so much psychology in the law, about the law, justice, all of that. I'm interested in his point of view on what jurors are thinking and how hard it is actually to get a real jury for the Tsarnaev case. And of course, how one might manipulate the Hernandez case, especially if you're an avid Patriots fan. So stay tuned for that tonight. Good evening. I am Dan York. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let us hustle to the rundown and see what's on the mind of your host tonight. Today, maybe we can switch the camera. There we go. All right, good start. A lot at stake, yes. In the journalism world, as a matter of fact, we're going to reset the whole view of 195. We're going to reset what we're doing at Newport Grand with Mr. Paolino. And you need teachers in the classrooms. You know, it's important, even though we have snow. And your state of mind is important to us. All right, let's dig in. Cameras are all set. We're all good. Buttons are pushed. We're ready to go. And there's a lot at stake. Yeah, Time.com headline right here. Unbelievable. Brian Williams recants story about being shot down in Iraq. This NBC news anchor, who's been the face of that news division, highly rated for such a long time now, is in a real jackpot. So he apologized last night on television for, well, I'll show it to you, then I'll see if I can make any sense of it.
On this broadcast last week, in an effort to honor and thank a veteran who protected me and so many others after a ground fire incident in the desert during the Iraq War invasion, I made a mistake in recalling the events of 12 years ago. I want to apologize. I said I was traveling in an aircraft that was hit by RPG fire. I was instead in a following aircraft.
Maybe our guest on psychology can weigh in on this one too. Brian, you don't misremember whether or not your vehicle, your helicopter, your aircraft was hit by an RPG. You end up getting excited about being on location and being embedded in wartime, and you start telling stories about how tough it was for you, and you dig yourself a hole and you stay with it. And you keep telling the story over and over again until it actually becomes implanted in your brain that it actually happened, or you try to get it there. There are no excuses for this. I don't care how long you've been telling the story. I don't care how long you misremembered. This is not acceptable. You are one of the key components in creating the actual court of public opinion. Journalism and credibility is still important, especially for the major staples like network news. You need to either come clean on the television, Mr. Williams, and say, you know what? I just lied the whole time. Please forgive me. Or just quit and hurry up before they pop you. Unbelievable. Next item, 195, take two. Yes, so the headlines show that Mr. Kane resigned his post. He's been here to talk about the approach in trying to develop those 40 acres just inside 195 to the foot of the city. And now Governor Raimondo says, you know what, thanks for the resignation, we're going to reset. She puts a whole bunch of new commissioners in there. Look, I applaud the governor taking charge here. I don't know what she thinks she's going to do with this land. She's not heck bent on the same formula that the commission has been, meaning that people have to buy that land. She might give it away for the right purpose. She had this crazy idea about a learning center during the campaign. I have no idea how that would come through. I just hope that this commission is open-minded, out of the box thinking, like a stadium, you know, like a stadium, a near riverfront stadium. Maybe it'll save a Paw Sox deal for the next 50 years. Just saying. Let's keep an open mind and be creative. Take two on Mr. Paolino as well. Got a couple of take twos. So here's the headline. Well, he's suing the city over some deal real estate-wise, so he gets in the news that way. And the lawsuit, you know, in some ways makes sense. He's saying the Blue Cross Blue Shield is getting tax advantages that make landlording not so competitive. All right, that's the one thing in the news. The second thing in the news, though, is kind of a double take two here. It's Newport Grand. And he's back in business to buy Newport Grand as long as the Hurley family that owns that facility can clear title. remember, he wasn't going to buy Newport Grand unless the people of Newport, along with the folks in the state, all voted to approve table games. Well, the state voters said yes, and the Newport voters said no. But now he's back into it, which tells me that he will just pound away. He'll get title, he'll buy it for a cheaper price, and then once he's in there, he will say, competitive problem, I need table games. At which time he's kind of got his hand on the throat of the constituents in Newport, and perhaps he gets it that way. You just keep pounding away and pounding away. I have no thought as to whether we ought to have table games or not. I just think it's funny that you say you have to have them or you won't buy it, and then you're back buying it. Headline, next item, teacherless classrooms. WPR.com shows us that there were 30 missing from New Bedford High School on Tuesday. Yeah, it was a snowy day. Here's the thing, they got 168 teachers on average there at the high school, 30 missing. Do the math, that's near 18% absenteeism on one day. On one day. It was too snowy. Then they left some classrooms empty, which must have been a field day for those students. Seems to me that is symbolic of public education today. You really can't have empty classrooms. Your state of mind is important to us. 228-1886 is the number. Dial us. Tell me what you think. Facebook post. Email me. You know how to do it. Here's a Facebook post right here. Barbara says, during the Vietnam War protests in the 60s, Philip Berrigan was arrested for nonviolent protest, sentenced to 6 years. Protesters today should face the same penalty. Endangering the lives of others should not be tolerated for whatever reason the protest. This is in reaction to Senator Raptakis and his felony proposal to take from misdemeanor to felony coming across major highways, stopping traffic and putting people in danger. I kind of support the idea, really do. I learned today that there was a hearing last night at the House Judiciary where a misdemeanor with a $1,000 fine was proposed as the solution. Not enough. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Okay, when we come back, the psychology of jurors. Fascinating conversation. Stay with us. You know, with this case with the Boston bombings, I think a lot of people are thinking, why don't they just throw the key away? You know, but there's more to it than that. We have this justice system that actually requires due process. Headline, yes, conflicts. There's always conflicts. Man, I'd love to sit on a jury. Maybe not this one, because I don't really think it's that fascinating, because I think all the evidence will point to a result that most people think is fait accompli. Dr. Thomas Guilmette from PC is here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. So your advanced people say that you've got some thoughts on the psychology of jurors, which I find fascinating. I've never been called for jury duty.
Ah, neither have I, actually.
Yeah, and well, you know what? You're not going to get on one.
Probably not right,
You're
yes.
too smart about evaluating them, and what I do for a living will probably disqualify me to sweet. You have any opinions on this? Yeah, yes I do. Your overall take on the difficulty of the Tsarnaev jury selection, which has been going on for a while. They had, what, 1,300 prospective
Right.
jurors just to get 12 and 6?
Something like that.
What makes it so hard?
Wow. Any trial in which there's a lot of, or any case in which there's a lot of pretrial publicity becomes problematic. This case in particular has had massive pretrial publicity. The bombing itself, and then, of course, the whole lockdown of Boston, essentially, when they were looking for the suspects, the MIT security guard who was shot, just the fact that it took place at the Boston Marathon, this landmark event that happens in Boston every year. The news was everywhere. It was 24/7. And so people not only come away with views and perspectives about the information that they got about this case, but also they also have a very strong emotional reaction to it as well. And so we're guaranteed to be tried by an impartial jury. And so you have to find 12 people, or actually 18 people, who can, in spite of this barrage of publicity and the very strong feelings that folks have about this, for them to be able to sit in a jury box and just listen to the evidence and have an open enough mind that they will let the evidence guide them to a verdict.
They got to reset completely.
Yes, right.
Even with the machinations between prosecution and defense and being able to toss jurors off for strategic purposes, when you get right down to it, when all that's done and exhausted, it's still going to be very difficult with this particular case to get people to admit that they can, to acknowledge honestly that they can reset. And then, of course, there's a second question that they're all being asked is whether or not they're open to the death penalty, because there are two phases to this case: guilty or innocent, duh, and then whether or not this kid ought to be all done. Which is the more difficult phase, do you think? Well, it's the same jury that's going to make two decisions.
Right, yes, yeah. Well, everyone who, you can't qualify to be on the jury unless you are willing to render a verdict of, unless you are willing to render the sentence of the death penalty. So that eliminates a whole bunch of jurors right off the bat.
But how you say that you're open to that is very, very sensitive, correct, for everyone's analysis. What you say about being open to the death penalty. If you are a vigilant death penalty person, you're also a difficult juror, correct?
You would be a difficult juror for the defense.
Not for the prosecution.
Right, likely not, because if you are a strong proponent of the death penalty, you're probably more likely than not going to be sort of a law and order kind of person. You're probably going to be sort of pro-prosecution, pro-police, that kind of a thing. And so you'd probably be a relatively good juror for the prosecution, but not so much for the defense. But just having this death-qualified jury, where everyone has to agree, or at least be open to the fact that if we render a guilty verdict, then if the state presents evidence such that the death penalty seems appropriate, then I'd be willing to vote for that. Those kinds of jurors tend to be pro-prosecution anyway. So, and in fact, there have been some Supreme Court decisions about whether or not a death-qualified jury is too pro-prosecution biased. Is it so that it then becomes difficult for a defendant to actually have a fair trial when the jury is sort of stacked?
This is a federal court case, but I think this only buoys my opinion at the beginning of this, which is that this was nonsense to try this kid. I don't, the exercise that they're going through right now, in my humble judgment, is a waste of time. It's going to be way too difficult to execute this kid. Throw the key away, be done with it. Why drag the families, the community, the justice system itself, all the way through? Settle. They wanted to. Why not? Your thought?
Yeah, I don't know why the government is continuing to pursue this case, other than perhaps to make a statement, perhaps
to who?
To, I don't know, would-be terrorists.
Right.
I don't know. But
why don't we show the terrorists how hard it is to actually get the death penalty in a system that's so fair by its design that we work really, really hard against what most people would hope would be inevitable, but which is impossible to execute. It's crazy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly, it does make you wonder what exactly the government's motivation is in this.
Do you think it's worth trying?
No, I don't.
Okay.
The cost, the expense.
Okay, so you're with me.
Yeah. I would say life imprisonment will take the death penalty off the table, but I'm not a prosecutor, so.
The psychology of jurors here in this particular trial, I think, is each individual juror is going to be fascinating. What kind of person do you think, in general, will qualify?
Wow. Well. That will be determined by the lawyers and the judges, of course, and the challenges that they have. A lot of jury selection is deselection. It's trying to keep people off the jury that are not that would not be favorable to your side.
So who lasts? Someone who doesn't watch the news much, someone who has apolitical thoughts, someone who's passive versus aggressive, a blend of that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to know what the final outcome will be like. I don't know that there's a stereotype or that there's a personality type or a demographic type that is the ideal juror in this kind of case. There are not a lot of ideal juror stereotypes. There are, in some cases, for example, women are more lenient toward defendants than men. In other cases, they're not. Age is sometimes a factor, sometimes not. In trying to predict juror behavior, it's very difficult, in part because we go to a trial with certain biases, values, our own personalities, our experiences, et cetera. And we listen to the trial, and the evidence is filtered through our own sort of psychology and our own background. And then we deliberate as a group. And then what can happen in terms of the group processes is very hard to predict.
Speaking of predictions, I predict guilty eventually and no death penalty because they can't come to it. What do you think?
Well, I think they will find the defendant to be guilty. The death penalty issue, there are folks in Massachusetts, I'm not sure they can find 12 people in Massachusetts who are pro-death penalty.
Right.
or at least who won't say that.
But also, the trial will show a play-by-play of defense empathy, if not sympathy, for the pressure that his brother put on him, blah, 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 blah,
His
blah.
age is also
Yeah,
a factor.
they're not going to fry this kid, or in this particular case, inject him. They're not going to do that. And so the whole thing will be millions of dollars spent for what? I don't know. But you know what I'm really interested in is how a Patriots fan permeates the Hernandez jury and then gets tossed out. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. What I found fascinating is that we've got a judge in Bristol County, Mass, that snuffed out a juror who was a little bit too much of a Patriots fan. Found out that she had gone to a couple more games than she wanted to admit in the early process, and she had her point of view that, hey, without a weapon, it's going to be hard to convict. That's not somebody you want on the jury.
That's not someone you want on the jury, unless you're the defense attorney, and then you want all 12 of those.
Right.
But for justice, you don't want her on the jury.
How do you think that happened?
Oh, because she lied.
Oh.
And jurors do that, and sometimes people want to get on juries so they can influence the outcome, and so they know what to say. In the same way that in the marathon bombing case, it's quite possible people want to get on that jury, especially because it's so high profile, and that will make great cocktail party chatter at some point in time.
And we don't truth serum these potential jurors. We don't give them lie detector tests if they're answering questions accurately. It's the most, perfectly imperfect system that you could have.
Very much, right. So you're asking someone in either of those cases. So you're familiar with this case? Well, of course I'm familiar with this case. So have you formed an opinion about the guilt or innocence of the defendant? Oh, no, I haven't. I'm completely open. Whatever way the evidence falls is how I'll find, And in your mind, you may be saying guilty as sin or the other end of that. And you can't tell if someone's lying. Police officers can, judges can't.
See, I'd be worried, just as a watcher of justice, and always am worried. The more high profile the case, the less a chance that a smart person will be unwitting about it, right? If it's a case that no one really heard about and you end up in a jury pool and it's an armed robbery that happened 3 towns over and whatever, didn't get much publicity, you can get smart people saying, no, anything about it, I'm wide open. But this stuff, I get very concerned about the acumen of the jury. Do you?
Yes, and yes, I do. And the other thing, however, that also can happen is that a person may have an agenda either way. And the issue is that a person may actually believe also that they can render an impartial verdict. But the fact is that they can't, that they're too emotionally invested but may not recognize it.
Were you concerned like I was to find out that this judge told the jury that was remaining, the Hernandez case, Judge Karsh, that the juror who has been dismissed was missing because of personal reasons? She lied to the jury about why the juror was dismissed. What do you think about that? I'm not happy with that.
Yeah.
Listen, jury, do not lean one way or the other about the outcome of this case based on the idea that juror number 96 is gone. Wash it from your brain. I'll get that, but it was personal. No.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, I'm absolutely not a judge, but it seems to me that there was sort of a teaching moment there that was passed up. Again, to reinforce the idea that this is, you have taken an oath, you have agreed that you will invest yourself in this process in the manner in which we describe it. You will not talk to anyone else about this case. You will not consider any other evidence. And if you do, here's what happens.
Yeah, guess what? Juror number 96 blew it. Stay straight. Instead, she lied to them. interestingly enough, she also told the victim's mother not to cry during testimony. Quite an interesting judge emerging in this Hernandez case, don't you think? Well,
yeah. You know, but every judge, like, it's like trying to pick a jury. There are a lot of the human factors are very difficult to predict and sort of corral, and judges are the same way. They're humans like us, and they have their own way of doing business, and especially when it's their courtroom, they can pretty much do whatever they want.
any recommendation for people who end up on juries? How should they comport themselves?
They should follow the judge's instructions, and they should behave themselves. And they should not talk to people about the case. They should not talk amongst themselves about the case. They should not be listening to other information about the case. They have to really narrow themselves to only consider the evidence that's mentioned at trial, which is quite the cognitive task, because you already know a lot about the trial or the crime already, and you have to ignore all that other stuff and just pretend that this is the only thing that matters.
I'll never forget the wonderful judge on the Plenodome case who told the jury, I think a little hyperbolic, but told the jury, this is the next best public service to serving in the military. In some ways, it's that serious.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's very serious. And especially in cases where there's the death penalty. I mean, how much more serious can it be?
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks
your
for having me.
perspective. All righty. One more thing when we come back. Stay with us. I wish I could get on a jury. I wish I can't get on a jury. It's hard, you know, to know that you'll never get on a jury, ever. Anyway, once I leave this profession, I still won't get on a jury. Hey, some fun tomorrow night. The snow cancellation video that Moses Brown put out that went viral with over 2 million views on YouTube will be the subject of the program, and the guy behind the idea will join us from Moses Brown. We'll see you on the radio at noon tomorrow on WPRL. Good night.